Millionaire finds an abandoned beggar trembling with cold, holding hungry twins at the church door. "Sir, they are my brothers," she pleads desperately. Looking into her eyes, he freezes. Carmen Ruiz huddled at the entrance of the San Francisco church. Her small fingers, purple from the cold, trembled as she tried to warm the twins, Miguel and Gabriel. The night wind slipped through the cracks of the old wooden door, bringing with it the dampness of the relentless rain. "You won't be left alone like I was," she whispered, swallowing her own tears to avoid scaring the babies who looked at her with trusting eyes, unaware of the gravity of their situation. Those eyes, identical to each other, were now her only anchor in a world that seemed to have crumbled around her. The small backpack beside her, worn from use and stained by the rain, contained her only possessions: some carefully folded cloth diapers, a jar of diluted powdered milk she had obtained from a health center, and an improvised bottle. Inside a waterproof plastic bag, she also kept her faded birth certificate, the only document her mother had insisted she always keep safe, wrapped in a piece of cloth inside a plastic container. "Papers are important, Carmen," Dolores had told her so many times. "Without them, it's as if you don't exist to the world." Though only 10 years old, Carmen had learned early that survival meant growing up too soon. In the La Promesa neighborhood, formerly known as Barrio Esperanza, Carmen still remembered with painful clarity the day, 2.5 years ago, when her father packed his bags. She was barely 7.5 then, a girl who still believed in the permanence of things, in the security of a home that, though humble, was filled with her parents' love. "Papa's going to work far away, but he'll be back soon with lots of gifts," Ramon lied that autumn afternoon, avoiding her gaze as he closed his worn suitcase. Carmen noticed he took the wedding photo, the only one they had framed, but left behind all the pictures where she appeared. This seemingly insignificant detail was the first that made her suspect something was wrong with that farewell. For months, she waited at the window every afternoon, her nose pressed against the fogged glass, scrutinizing every male figure that appeared at the end of the street, convinced that any moment she'd see her father return laden with gifts as promised. Gradually, that childish waiting turned into more urgent responsibilities, helping care for her mother, who, consumed by sadness and abandonment, began to fall ill slowly, like a flower deprived of light and water. The first coughs seemed harmless, small fits that Dolores attributed to the change of season or the dust in the warehouse where she had found work sorting used clothes. "It's nothing, my girl," she'd say, downplaying the handkerchiefs that increasingly appeared stained with red. But Carmen, with the sharp intuition developed by children who have seen too much, knew something serious was happening. After a year of living off favors from neighbors and distant relatives who gradually drifted away, they were evicted from the small apartment they had managed to keep for a while. The landlord, Don Enrique, a usually understanding man, finally gave into his wife's pressure, who insisted that tuberculosis is contagious, and we have to think of our own family. The night of the eviction, under a fine drizzle that seemed to accompany their misfortune, Carmen held her mother as they walked aimlessly, carrying a suitcase with their few belongings. In the shanty on Cerro de la Fe, a precarious structure, made of reused materials and zinc sheets, Carmen quickly learned skills no child should have to master at her age. She learned to prepare simple meals with minimal ingredients, to keep the space clean despite constant leaks when it rained, and above all, to help her increasingly frail mother with the most basic tasks. "You deserved a real family," Dolores would say between coughing fits that shook her entire body. "Clean clothes, a nice school, toys, friends, everything a girl should have." Her sunken eyes and a face growing ever more gaunt filled with tears she tried to hide by turning her face to the wall. But Carmen, with a maturity she shouldn't have had so early, understood that her childhood had been replaced by a greater mission, keeping her mother alive and both of them under a roof, however precarious. Mornings in Cerro de la Fe began early, for Carmen. Before dawn, she was already up, heating water on a small makeshift stove to prepare an herbal infusion that an elderly neighbor had taught her to make. "These herbs clean the lungs," Doña Pilar had said, though both knew no herb could stop the relentless advance of the disease consuming Dolores. Still, the morning ritual gave Carmen a sense of control, of doing something useful in a desperate situation. On the city streets, Carmen quickly learned the unwritten rules of urban survival. She discovered which corners were most lucrative for begging: near the church after Sunday Mass, outside the theater on Friday nights, when elegantly Dressed crowds emerged, or at the market square on Saturday mornings. She also learned which establishments left food scraps at the end of the day, and which merchants were more likely to give her near-expired products. Her fragile appearance, large hazel eyes and a face too thin, chestnut hair she clumsily cut herself, to keep manageable, and always clean but visibly worn clothes, often evoked pity from passers-by. But it was the dignity in her gaze that truly struck those who stopped to look at her. It wasn't the defeated look expected of a street child, but a direct, clear gaze reflecting an iron will beneath her apparent fragility. A neighborhood merchant, Don Jose, owner of a small bakery, noticed this unusual strength. Sometimes, when Carmen passed his shop at dusk, he'd call her discreetly and set aside day-old bread in a paper bag. "This little one has more grit than many grown men," he'd comment to other customers watching the scene. "She gets up every day and fights. No complaints, no self-pity." The first time Don Jose gave her bread, Carmen tried to pay with the few coins she'd collected that day. The baker, surprised by the gesture, refused the money with a sad smile. "Better save those coins for your mother's medicine, little one." Carmen never forgot that act of kindness, or how she had to hold back tears until she turned the corner to avoid showing weakness to her benefactor. At night, kneeling beside the mat where her mother slept, Carmen maintained the ritual that sustained her amid the chaos of her life. With hands clasped and eyes tightly shut, she whispered her prayers in the dim light of a nearly spent candle. "Thank you, Lord, for the little we have today, for the bread Don Jose gave us, for the medicine we could buy. Tomorrow you'll send more, I know. Take care of Mama tonight, ease her pain, help her breathe better." Her voice was barely audible, as if she feared waking her mother with her pleas to heaven. "And if you can, Lord, tell Papa where we are. Maybe he doesn't know how to find us, and that's why he hasn't come back." This last request, repeated night after night for months, gradually faded from her prayers, replaced by more immediate, urgent concerns. Her faith wasn't naive, but a necessary anchor in a crumbling world, a way to make sense of the inexplicable, to find strength when all seemed lost. When she managed to bring food home, some fruit picked from the market ground, leftovers of a stew a restaurant cook had given her in a plastic container, or stale bread she could soften in milk, Carmen didn't mention the humiliations she'd endured to get it. She didn't talk about how some called her little gypsy or poor thing, how others ignored her completely as if she were invisible, or worse, how some men made propositions that, though she didn't fully understand due to her age, she instinctively knew were dangerous. Instead, she only smiled when she saw her mother eat a little, inwardly celebrating each spoonful Dolores managed to swallow despite the pain and fatigue. "God takes care of us even in the hardest moments," Carmen would say, repeating what her mother had taught her before falling ill. The phrase now sounded on her lips with a wisdom gained through pain that surprised the adults who occasionally visited their humble dwelling. The last 6 months of Dolores's illness created in Carmen, now 9 years old, a surprisingly organized routine of care. The neighbor, Doña Esperanza, marveled at the methodical way the girl tended to her mother. "You're like a professional nurse, little one," she'd say, watching as Carmen monitored her mother's persistent fever by touching her forehead. With the back of her hand, administered the cheap medications they'd obtained at the correct times marked on a paper with simple drawings of the sun's position, or gave sponge baths when her mother's body burned with fever. "Carmen, my angel," Dolores whispered one winter madrugada, when the cold seeped through the shanty's cracks and her breath formed small clouds in the icy air. The dim light of a candle illuminated her face, now so thin that her cheekbones protruded like blades under translucent skin. "Promise me you'll always remember you are loved, that no matter how dark the world seems." Dolores paused to catch her breath, the advanced tuberculosis making each word a monumental effort. Her eyes, though sunken, shone with fierce intensity, as if she wanted to etch this final message into her daughter's soul. "You are never truly alone." "No, Mama, please," Carmen pleaded, resting her head on her mother's fragile chest, where she could feel the increasingly faint heartbeat. "I'll pray harder. I'll get the money for that medicine the doctor mentioned." Her words reflected a concrete plan. She had been saving coins in a tin buried in the corner of the shanty, cents saved over months at the cost of her own nourishment. It was no longer just childish desperation, but the anguish of someone who understood exactly what she was losing and what would come next. Dolores gathered her last strength to embrace her daughter, aware this would likely be their final hug. Her arms, once strong and secure, were now like dry branches. But for Carmen, there was still no safer place in the world than that embrace. "Daughter, forgive Mama," Dolores managed to say, stroking Carmen's tangled hair with trembling fingers. "I feel I'll soon be with the Heavenly Father, but I'll never stop watching over you. When you feel the wind touch your face, that's me. When you see a bird perch near you, that's me visiting you. When you feel warmth in your heart amidst the cold, that's me loving you always." 3 days later, Carmen woke in the dawn's dimness and immediately sensed the silence, the absence of the labored breathing that had been the soundtrack of her nights for so long. She stayed very still for a moment, as if not moving could stop time, avoid the truth she already intuited. Finally, with courage that would astonish any adult, she slowly approached the cot where her mother lay, touched Dolores's face, feeling the coldness of her skin, the stiffness beginning to settle in her once soft features despite the suffering. Even in the shock of the discovery, her first act was to gently close her mother's eyes, as she had seen Doña Esperanza do with her husband months earlier. She had heard so many conversations among the community's women about death, about the necessary rituals, that she knew exactly what to do, though each movement cost a piece of her soul. With trembling but determined hands, Carmen washed her mother's body with water she had collected the previous night. She dressed her in the only clean dress left, a faded blue one Dolores saved for special occasions, and carefully combed her thinning hair, as her mother used to do for her when she was healthy. As she performed these tasks, silent tears ran down her cheeks. But she didn't allow herself to break down. "I promise I'll be strong, Mama," she whispered, adjusting the dress's collar. "I'll keep my promise." After the neighborhood helped with the simple burial, Carmen found temporary refuge with different families until she met Mercedes Oliveira, 3 months into a complicated pregnancy. "My little one," Mercedes said when she found her sleeping on a staircase. "I know you lost your mother. I lost my parents very young too. Maybe we can help each other." That encounter, which many would call coincidence, Carmen recognized as the answer to her prayers, a small miracle disguised as chance, as her mother always said would happen. Over the next 3 months of living together, the bond between Carmen and Mercedes grew until it resembled a family relationship. The girl, who had just turned 10, became an essential support for the pregnant woman struggling with a high-risk pregnancy complicated by anemia and hypertension. Carmen had learned to identify signs of preeclampsia, memorized medication schedules, and, through her work as a delivery girl for Don Jose, managed to buy some essential items for the babies to come. "Aunt Mercedes, I slept in the health center's waiting room and got the first number. You'll be the first seen tomorrow," she announced proudly one night after spending 12 hours in line. Mercedes, her face showing the fatigue of a difficult pregnancy, smiled with tears in her eyes. "Carmen, you're an angel God has placed in my path. I don't know what I'd do without you." When the twins were born prematurely at 8 months, weighing just over 2 kilos each, Carmen was already fully integrated into the makeshift little family. In the 3 months following their birth, it was she who organized a system of shifts among neighbors to obtain donated breast milk, as Mercedes produced little. While other children played in the street or attended school, she studied a neonatal care pamphlet a compassionate nurse had given her, learning about the importance of body temperature, signs of infection, and feeding techniques for premature babies. "It's incredible how you care for these babies," commented the social worker who visited the apartment once, more interested in verifying if Mercedes had the resources to support the twins than in offering real help. "You have a nurse's hands, you know." The fragile stability they had built was abruptly shattered when Alberto, Mercedes's ex-husband, who had been imprisoned for assault, was released on good behavior and discovered through a mutual acquaintance where she lived. He had sworn to take the children by force, according to neighbors who heard him in the community bar where he drank to intoxication and hurled threats against Mercedes and that meddling girl living with her, referring to Carmen. That stormy night, the worst the city had seen in years according to the neighborhood elders, Carmen was awake, feeding Gabriel, the smaller and frailer of the twins. A lightning bolt briefly illuminated the room, followed by a thunderclap that rattled the small apartment's windows. Then she heard the first bangs on the door, followed by shouts that chilled her blood. "Open the door, Mercedes. I know you're in there with my kids." Carmen wasn't caught off guard. For weeks, she had been mentally preparing for this possibility, keeping a small backpack always ready with essentials for the twins, anticipating this moment might come. She had hidden it under her mattress, along with some saved money and a city map where she had marked safe places to seek refuge if needed. "Please, my girl, take the twins and run fast," Mercedes shouted, as Alberto, having broken the lock with a blow, shoved her violently against the wall. "The kids are mine," he bellowed, his voice distorted by alcohol and rage. A deafening thunderclap tore through the sky, providing the perfect acoustic cover for Carmen to execute the plan she had rehearsed mentally dozens of times. With surprising agility for a girl her age, Carmen placed Miguel, who was fortunately sound asleep, in an improvised baby carrier she had made by tying a sturdy shawl across her chest. Gabriel, awake but silent, as if sensing the gravity of the situation, she placed in a side sling she had crafted following the community midwife's instructions. This weight distribution, though still challenging for her small 10-year-old body, made the impossible possible, carrying 2 babies at once while keeping some freedom of movement in her hands. The path to the church wasn't random. Carmen had carefully explored different options in the weeks prior, and determined that the San Francisco church was the only place that remained open at night, and where she had received help before. The rain pounded mercilessly as Carmen moved. Through the dark streets, now small streams from the force of the downpour. She frequently stopped under eaves or awnings to adjust the babies, ensure they were dry under the layers of improvised plastic from bags she had placed over them, and catch her breath. Her small body trembled from the effort and cold, but her determination remained unshaken. "God, please," she whispered, resting briefly under the awning of a closed pharmacy. Just a little more strength for them. Just a little more. She could feel the warmth of the twins' bodies against hers, their heartbeats like small drums marking the rhythm of her mission. Upon finally reaching the San Francisco church, its silhouette standing out against the stormy sky like a beacon of hope, Carmen used the side entrance that the sacristan, Don Antonio, always left unlocked for the homeless on stormy nights. With the last of her strength, she settled the twins in the driest, warmest corner she could find near the confessional, where drafts were less noticeable. She used her own coat as a first layer to insulate the babies from the cold stone floor, then covered them with a relatively dry blanket she had kept protected inside the backpack. Sitting on the stone floor, her back against the wall and the twins nestled beside her, Carmen finally allowed a few silent tears to roll down her cheeks, mingling with the raindrops still dripping from her hair. They weren't tears of self-pity but a complex mix of emotions. Relief at reaching a safe place, fear of the uncertain future awaiting them, and deep concern for Mercedes, whom she had had to leave behind facing Alberto's blind fury. "We'll come back for you, Aunt Mercedes," she promised in a low voice, gently stroking Miguel's head as the baby stirred briefly in his sleep. "We won't leave you alone." The dawn began to filter through the church's stained glass windows when Carmen woke startled. During the night, she had managed to doze off in fits, always with one ear alert to any sound that might indicate danger or the twins' needs. Beside her, Miguel and Gabriel slept peacefully, unaware of the drama surrounding them, their small faces serene under the multicolored light cast by the windows. Carmen sat up slowly, every muscle in her body protesting from the night spent on the hard stone floor. A pang of worry pierced her chest as she remembered Mercedes. Had she managed to escape Alberto? Was she injured? Would she know where to look for them? These questions crowded her mind as she heard the bells announcing the day's first mass. Soon the church would fill with worshippers, and they would have to move. Carmen knew she couldn't stay there indefinitely, but she also had no clear plan about where to go. With hands trembling from the cold, she checked the contents of her backpack. There was little left, less than half a jar of powdered milk, 4 clean diapers, and a few coins she had managed to save. She mentally calculated how many feedings she could prepare for the twins, and the result tied a knot in her throat. They wouldn't make it through the night. "Good morning, little one," said a kind voice behind her, startling her. Carmen turned quickly, her protective instinct making her immediately position herself in front of the babies. Before her stood Father Luis, a young priest who had arrived at the parish just a year ago. His face showed a mix of surprise and concern. "Don't be afraid. I won't harm you." Carmen assessed the priest with the cautious gaze she had developed on the streets. She had seen him before, distributing food to the homeless and organizing a small school for neighborhood children. But trust was a hard habit to break when one had suffered so much. "The children need food," she responded finally, her voice steadier than she expected. "We'll only stay until the rain stops." Though the rain had subsided considerably, Carmen used this pretext to buy time to think about her next move. Father Luis nodded understandingly and crouched to her level, keeping a respectful distance. I can prepare some breakfast while we figure out what to do. There's fresh milk in the sacristy and warm bread that Don Jose just brought. The mention of Don Jose, the baker who had helped them so many times, made Carmen lower her guard slightly. Father Luis, sensing this change, continued in a gentle voice. The sacristy door has a small stove. You'd be warmer there than in the church nave. Just then, Gabriel began to stir, his tiny legs kicking under the blanket, signaling he would soon cry from hunger. Carmen hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. All right, but you won't call anyone, right? Not the police or social services. She said this almost as a plea rather than a demand. You have my word, Father Luis replied, raising a hand, as if making a vow. First breakfast, then we talk calmly. The sacristy was indeed warmer, with a small stove radiating comforting heat. While Father Luis warmed fresh milk in a saucepan, Carmen fed the twins in turns, first Gabriel, who was the most impatient, then Miguel. The fresh milk was infinitely better than the diluted formula she had been using, and the babies drank it with evident satisfaction. Can I ask what brought you here? The priest inquired after a while, offering Carmen a cup of hot chocolate and a freshly baked roll that gave off an irresistible aroma. It had been so long since Carmen had tasted something so delicious that for a moment she hesitated to accept it, as if it were too good to be true. Something in Father Luis's genuine look, in the way he had respected her space and silences, made Carmen decide to share part of the truth. She spoke of Mercedes, the high-risk pregnancy, the premature twins, and Alberto, the violent ex-husband who had appeared the previous night. She omitted, however, her entire personal history. Her mother, the tuberculosis, her life on the streets, as if that part of her past were too intimate to share, too painful to voice. Father Luis listened attentively without interrupting, only nodding occasionally to show he followed the story. When Carmen finished, he let a moment of silence pass before speaking. I have a friend, Dr. Ana Vega, who works at San Rafael Hospital. She could help us find out if a woman named Mercedes was admitted last night, possibly with injuries from domestic violence. Carmen considered the proposal, weighing the risks. If she's there, we could go see her. Of course, the priest replied. And if she's not there, we'll keep looking. I won't leave you alone in this, I promise. While Father Luis made some calls from the sacristy phone, Carmen changed the twins' diapers and spoke to them in whispers. We're going to find your mama, little ones. Don't worry. She didn't know if the babies could understand her, but talking to them calmed her, giving her purpose and direction amid the chaos. Confirmation came half an hour later. Mercedes Oliveira had been admitted the previous night with multiple bruises and a possible arm fracture. She was stable but sedated for pain. Alberto had been arrested on the spot, thanks to a neighbor who called the police upon hearing the screams. We can go now, Father Luis said. Dr. Ana is expecting us. She said she can help us see Mercedes, even outside visiting hours. The hospital was 15 blocks from the church. Too far to walk with the twins, especially after the night they'd had. Father Luis called a taxi, paying for it himself despite Carmen's protests, insisting she'd note the amount to repay him someday. The ride to the hospital was short, but intense. Carmen looked out the window, amazed at how life continued normally. For the rest of the world, people hurrying to work, shops opening their doors, children with backpacks heading to school. While her small universe had collapsed in a matter of hours. Dr. Ana Vega met them at the hospital entrance, a middle-aged woman with a kind but tired face, her hair pulled into a messy bun suggesting a long shift. Her eyes softened when she saw the twins. You've done an incredible job caring for these little ones, she told Carmen as she led them through the hospital corridors to Mercedes's room. They're very well looked after, despite the circumstances. Carmen acknowledged the compliment with a slight nod, but her mind was focused on what they would find when they opened the door to room 312. How would Mercedes be? How severe would her injuries be? And above all, what would happen to them now? The sight of Mercedes in the hospital bed was a hard blow for Carmen to process. Her face, usually radiant despite hardships, was swollen and bruised on the right side. Her left arm lay immobile on a pillow, wrapped in a white cast up to the elbow. An IV line connected to her right arm delivered what Carmen assumed were painkillers, judging by Mercedes's drowsy expression. Carmen, Mercedes exclaimed upon seeing her, trying to sit up with difficulty. My babies. Are they okay? Tears began to roll down her cheeks as she extended her right hand toward them. Carmen approached the bed, letting Mercedes touch the twins, who seemed to instinctively recognize their mother, stirring with more energy in their makeshift carriers. I kept them safe, as I promised, Carmen said, her voice breaking. They're fine. Nothing happened to them. Mercedes sobbed softly, her gaze alternating between the babies and Carmen. My brave girl, my little heroine. I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. Father Luis and Dr. Ana discreetly stepped back to a corner of the room, giving them space for this emotional reunion. They spoke in low voices, likely about the legal and medical situation, but Carmen barely registered their voices, completely focused on Mercedes and the twins. Does it hurt a lot? Carmen asked, worriedly observing the bruises on Mercedes's face. Now that I see you safe, I barely feel the pain, Mercedes replied with a brave smile that belied the physical evidence of her suffering. The important thing is that you're okay. I was so afraid for you all. When I saw Alberto come in like that, her voice broke, unable to continue. Carmen gently took her hand, offering the same comfort she had so often received from her in the past months. You weren't afraid, Mercedes said, regaining composure. You acted exactly as you needed to. You're the bravest girl I've ever known. Those words, spoken with such conviction and gratitude, stirred a complex mix of emotions in Carmen. On one hand, pride for keeping her promise to protect the twins. On the other, sadness at knowing she had once again had to be much more than a child, a grown-up in a body too small for the responsibilities she carried. The conversation with Dr. Ana and Father Luis, who eventually joined them, brought both good and troubling news. Alberto would remain detained for at least 72 hours, as he had been caught in the act of domestic violence. Mercedes's injuries would require at least a week of hospitalization, particularly due to the arm fracture and a possible concussion they were monitoring. The main problem is the children, Dr. Ana explained. Without an immediate family member to take custody and with Mercedes hospitalized, regulations require us to notify social services. The immediate panic in Carmen's eyes didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. No, she said firmly. I can take care of them. I've been doing it all this time. Carmen, sweetheart, Mercedes intervened, her voice gentle but firm. You're wonderful with them, but you're only 10 years old. You can't stay alone with 2 babies in an apartment without an adult present. But they'll separate us, Carmen insisted, feeling her world begin to waver again. They'll put Miguel and Gabriel in different homes. The babies need to stay together, and they'll send me somewhere else. We can't be separated now. Father Luis, who had been listening attentively, stepped in with a proposal. There's a third option we could explore. The parish manages a small foster home run by the Sisters of Charity. I could speak with Sister Lucia to take you in temporarily, all 3 of you, until Mercedes recovers. Carmen's expression made it clear that the idea of an orphanage or foster home, even temporarily, terrified her. Stories circulating among street children about such places were rarely positive. It's not what you imagine, Father Luis added, reading her expression. It's a small home with only 8 children currently. They're well cared for, go to school, have activities, and most importantly, you could stay together. You and the twins. You could keep caring for them, just with help and supervision. Mercedes squeezed Carmen's hand. It would only be for a while, my girl, until I recover, and we can all be together again. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Both knew the alternative. Separation, different homes, perhaps even in different cities. Carmen remained silent, processing this information. Her quick mind, as always in crises, evaluated options, calculated risks, searched for ways out. But this time, the alternatives seemed to run dry. Could I visit Mercedes every day? She asked finally, her voice small but determined. Of course, Dr. Ana confirmed. We can arrange daily visits outside regular hours, and as soon as Mercedes is recovered enough for discharge, we'll reassess the entire situation. The decision was practically made when a new visitor entered the room. A woman in her 50s, formally dressed, carrying a folder under her arm and an expression Carmen instantly recognized. A social worker. Her heart raced, anticipating the worst. Good morning, the woman greeted, introducing herself as Sofia Martinez from Child Social Services. I've been notified of a case involving 2 infants without effective parental custody. Father Luis stepped forward immediately, explaining the situation and the temporary solution they had been discussing. Surprisingly, the social worker didn't reject the idea outright. Casa San Jose is on our list of approved centers, she confirmed after reviewing some documents in her folder. If Sister Lucia agrees to take them in, we could authorize it as a temporary emergency placement, provided the paperwork is completed and follow-up visits are scheduled. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Father Luis made several calls, the social worker filled out forms, and Dr. Ana arranged a quick checkup for the twins to ensure they were in good health. While the adults handled logistical and administrative details, Carmen stayed by Mercedes's bedside, both aware that a separation, however temporary, was approaching. It was another goodbye in Carmen's life, another abrupt change, another loss, though this time with the promise of a reunion. I promise I'll recover as fast as possible, Mercedes said, stroking Carmen's tangled hair. We'll follow the rules, do everything they tell us, and soon we'll be together again at home. Carmen nodded, trying with all her strength to believe that promise. She had learned too young that promises sometimes broke, that adults sometimes disappeared, that life could take cruel turns when least expected. But she had also learned that sometimes, in the deepest darkness, small lights of hope appeared. Don Jose with his bread, Father Luis with his offer of help, Dr. Ana with her kindness. We'll see you tomorrow, Carmen promised as they prepared to leave for Casa San Jose. And I'll tell you all about that place and how Miguel and Gabriel are doing. The farewell was brief, but intense. Mercedes kissed each of her children, whispering words of love in their ears. Then she hugged Carmen with her uninjured arm, as tightly as her injuries allowed. My brave girl, she whispered in her ear. Never forget how special you are, how strong you are. I love you like a daughter. Carmen held back tears until they were in the hallway, out of Mercedes's sight. She didn't want her last memory before the separation to be of her crying. She wanted Mercedes to remember her as strong, capable, reliable, as she had always tried to be. Casa San Jose was different from what Carmen had imagined. Located on a quiet street about 20 minutes from the hospital, it was a spacious, bright house with a small but well-kept garden. Sister Lucia, an older woman with a serene face and measured movements, greeted them personally at the door. Welcome to our home, she said with a warm smile. We've prepared a special room for you, with 2 cribs for the babies and a bed, for you, Carmen, so you can all be together. The house's interior was simple but cozy, with walls painted in soft colors and photos of smiling children in the hallways. There were no luxuries, but everything was impeccably clean and organized. It smelled of homemade food and cleanliness, a combination Carmen vaguely associated with her earliest memories, before her mother's illness changed everything. The room, assigned to them, was small but sufficient, with a window overlooking the backyard garden. The cribs were equipped with clean sheets and soft blankets, and next to Carmen's bed, they had placed a small table with a lamp and a vase with fresh flowers. I know this is difficult, Sister Lucia said after the social worker left, having completed all necessary documentation. But we'll try to make you feel at home while you're with us, and we'll work together so you can reunite with Mercedes as soon as possible. That night, after feeding the twins with help from Sister Teresa, a young and enthusiastic novice who showed genuine interest in learning the specific routines Carmen had developed for the baby's care, Carmen sat on her new bed, gazing at the starry sky through the window. The day had been exhausting in every way, physically, emotionally, and mentally. So many changes, so many decisions, so many emotions. She felt older, as if years had passed instead of hours since she woke, on the cold church floor. Before lying down, Carmen performed the ritual that had anchored her through the hardest years. Kneeling by the bed, hands clasped and eyes closed, she whispered her nightly prayer. Thank you, Lord, for keeping the twins safe. Thank you for Father Luis and Dr. Ana, and for this place where we can be together. Please help Mercedes recover, soon. And if you can... She paused, debating internally before continuing. If you can, tell my mama I'm okay, that I'm still strong like she taught me. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she slipped into bed, exhausted but strangely at peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and adjustments. But for tonight, they were safe, and that was enough for now. As she drifted into sleep, Her final thoughts were of Mercedes, alone in that hospital room, and of her own mother, Dolores, whose memory lived on in every act of courage and every display of determination Carmen showed day after day. 3 weeks had passed since their arrival at Casa San Jose, a time that to Carmen felt both endless and fleeting. Miguel and Gabriel, now nearly 5 months old, showed remarkable progress daily, smiling more, responding to familiar voices, and beginning to babble small sounds that Carmen interpreted as secret conversations between them. The routine at the foster home was predictable and reassuring. Mornings began early with the twins' cries demanding their first feeding. Carmen, always an early riser by necessity, woke automatically before them, as if she had an internal clock synced with their needs. Sister Teresa, who had grown especially fond of the three, usually appeared shortly after with prepared bottles and a kind smile. "Good morning, little early bird," Teresa greeted that morning, entering with the usual tray. "How did our champions sleep?" "Miguel slept through the night for the first time," Carmen replied with evident pride, taking Gabriel, who was always the first to demand attention, into her arms. "But Gabriel still wakes up at 3 a.m. like clockwork." Sister Teresa smiled, handing her a warm bottle and picking up Miguel. In these weeks, they had developed an almost perfect sync, each mirroring the other's movements without need for words, like dancers performing a well-rehearsed choreography. "Today's a visiting day," Teresa commented while feeding Miguel. "Mercedes will be thrilled to see how much they've grown. Have you noticed Gabriel's little tooth starting to show?" Carmen nodded, a mix of joy and worry crossing her face. Visits to Mercedes were the highlight of each week, but also painful reminders of their situation. Despite clear progress in Mercedes's recovery, the social worker, Sofia Martinez, had explained that the process to regain full custody of the twins would be slow, requiring multiple evaluations and approvals. "Do you think this time they'll let her come visit us here?" Carmen asked, her voice blending hope and skepticism. "She can walk without crutches now, and her arm is almost healed." Teresa sighed lightly. "Father Luis is working on it, sweetheart. But remember, there are lots of rules to follow. The important thing is you're moving in the right direction." Carmen didn't respond, focusing on Gabriel, who sucked the bottle eagerly. She had learned early that rules rarely favored people like her and Mercedes, poor, single women without influential connections or resources to navigate the complex bureaucratic system that decided their fates. After breakfast, while the twins napped, Carmen joined the classes Sister Lucia taught to the home's children. Unlike the others, who attended local schools during the day, Carmen had been temporarily excused to stay near the twins. Sister Lucia, a former elementary school teacher, had taken it upon herself to help Carmen catch up on the basic content she'd missed during her years away from school. "You've made remarkable progress in reading," Sister Lucia commented, reviewing the notebook where Carmen had copied a short text. "Your handwriting is clear, and you barely have spelling mistakes. We'll need to work a bit more on math, but all in good time." For Carmen, these study moments were a luxury she had never imagined possible. She vaguely remembered her first year of school, before her mother's illness changed everything. The colorful classrooms, the illustrated books, the feeling of discovering a new world through letters and numbers. Now, despite the circumstances, she felt an almost insatiable thirst to reclaim that lost knowledge. "Sister Lucia," Carmen asked during a break, "do you think I'll be able to go to a regular school someday?" The elderly nun looked at her with a mix of tenderness and admiration. "Not only do I think so, Carmen, I'm convinced of it. You have a brilliant mind and exceptional determination. When this is all sorted out, I'll personally speak to the principal of Santa Maria School to get you admitted, even if it's mid-term." The promise, though well-intentioned, stirred mixed feelings in Carmen. On one hand, the excitement of resuming a normal path for a girl her age. On the other, fear of what that undefined future would bring for the twins and her bond with them. The longer she spent at Casa San Jose, the more aware she became of the precariousness of her legal situation, and the fact that she wasn't truly family to Miguel and Gabriel. At least, not according to official documents. The afternoon brought the anticipated hospital visit. Father Luis, true to his commitment, arrived punctually at the house to pick up Carmen and the twins. During the ride in his modest car, he shared the latest updates. "Mercedes will be discharged next week," he announced with an encouraging smile. Her physical recovery has been faster than expected. However, the pause in his words immediately alerted Carmen. However, what, Father? The priest chose his words carefully. The situation with Alberto has gotten complicated. He was released yesterday on bail with a restraining order prohibiting him from approaching Mercedes or the children. But he's hired a lawyer and is claiming visitation rights. Carmen felt as if she'd been physically struck. That can't be. He tried to hurt them. Because of him, we had to flee in the middle of the night. I know, Carmen, Father Luis replied, his tone calm but firm. And Mercedes knows. Her lawyer is working to prove his history of violence and ensure he loses all parental rights. But it's a process, and we must follow legal channels. The worry about this new threat accompanied Carmen throughout the ride to the hospital. Her mind, always alert to potential dangers, began evaluating scenarios and desperate solutions. What if Alberto tried to take the twins by force? What if the authorities, swayed by some clever lawyer, decided to grant him some form of shared custody? The idea was unbearable. Mercedes was waiting, seated by the window of her hospital room. Her appearance had improved notably since that first meeting after the stormy night. The bruises had almost entirely faded from her face, replaced by the healthy color that had always characterized her. Her left arm, though still in rehabilitation, no longer needed the cast, only an elastic support that allowed limited movement. "My treasures!" she exclaimed upon seeing them enter, extending her arms to receive the twins, whom Carmen carried in a double carrier, a much more elaborate and secure version than the makeshift one used that night of escape. Miguel and Gabriel, instantly recognizing their mother's voice, began to squirm and babble with enthusiasm. The reunion, like every week, was emotional. Mercedes kissed and hugged her children, marveling at every small change, each new gesture, each sound that hadn't been there the previous week. Carmen watched the scene with a mix of joy and nostalgia, happy to see the twins with their mother but painfully aware that she no longer had anyone to greet her with that uncontainable joy. While Mercedes played with the babies on the hospital bed, Father Luis took the opportunity to speak with the attending doctor in the hallway. Carmen, ever vigilant, excused herself to get a glass of water, strategically positioning herself near the half-open door. "The head trauma is completely resolved," she heard the doctor say, "and the fracture has healed well. Physically, she's fit for discharge. However, I'm concerned about her emotional state. Victims of domestic violence often—" She couldn't hear the rest of the conversation as a nurse passed by, forcing her to move away to avoid suspicion. When she returned to the room, Mercedes was waiting with a serious expression. "Carmen, we need to talk," she said, patting a spot on the bed beside her. "Father Luis told me Alberto has been released." Carmen nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Are you afraid?" she asked directly, with the frankness only children, who have seen too much, can muster. Mercedes considered the question for a moment. "Yes," she admitted finally. "I'm afraid, but not for myself. I'm afraid for the children and for you." "We could leave," Carmen suggested in a low voice, ensuring Father Luis, still talking in the hallway, couldn't hear. "I know places where we could hide. When you're out of the hospital, we could take a bus to another city, start over where Alberto can't find us." The suggestion, made with all the seriousness and determination of a mind accustomed to planning escapes and surviving extreme situations, brought tears to Mercedes's eyes. She hugged Carmen tightly, pulling her so close that the girl could feel the rapid beating of her heart. "My brave girl," she whispered, "always thinking of solutions, always ready to face anything to protect those you love. But this time, we can't run." "Why not?" Carmen insisted, frustration evident in her voice. "Alberto is dangerous. If he gets visitation rights, he could hurt the twins or take them away." Mercedes took a deep breath before responding. "Because running now would mean living, in hiding forever, always looking over our shoulders, without access to schools, hospitals, or any official help. The children need stability. They need to grow up in a place where they can thrive fully." "But," Carmen began to protest. "And you," Mercedes continued, taking her face in her hands to make her look directly into her eyes. "You deserve so much more than a life in the shadows. You deserve to go to school, have friends, dream of a bright future. I can't ask you to sacrifice all that for us." Mercedes's words, though spoken with love, opened a deep wound in Carmen. Because deep down, very deep down, she had already accepted that she would sacrifice anything for the twins, that her future was inextricably tied to theirs. Hearing that Mercedes envisioned a different path, one where they might not be together, was like losing the ground beneath her feet again. "What's going to happen then?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from revealing the emotional storm raging inside her. "We're going to fight," Mercedes replied with a determination Carmen hadn't seen in her before. "We're going to fight, within the system, with every legal tool available. The lawyer Father Luis got for us is confident we can prove Alberto is a danger to the children. And meanwhile, we'll keep following all the rules, proving we're a stable, functional family." The word family resonated in Carmen's heart. Was that what they were? A family? The idea was so precious, so fragile, that she almost feared allowing herself to believe it. "And me?" she asked finally, the question that had been circling her mind for weeks. "What will happen to me when this is all over?" Mercedes's expression softened, a warm smile lighting up her face. "You, my girl, are part of this family. If you'll allow me, I'd like to apply for your legal guardianship. Not to replace your mother, never could, but to offer you a stable home, to ensure you have the opportunities you deserve." The unexpected, overwhelming proposal left Carmen speechless. For so long she had felt adrift, not truly belonging anywhere, responsible only for herself and those who temporarily depended on her. The idea of having a permanent home, of being a legitimate part of a family was so extraordinary, it almost seemed impossible. "Could you do that?" she asked finally, hope and disbelief mingling in her voice. "Would the authorities allow it?" "It won't be easy," Mercedes admitted. "We'll need to prove I can offer you emotional and financial stability. But Father Luis has contacts in social services, and Sister Lucia has written very positive reports about our bond and your dedication." To the twins, Carmen looked at the babies, now sleeping peacefully on the hospital bed, their tiny hands almost touching as if, even in sleep, they needed to feel each other's presence. The idea of a real family, of a shared future, began to take root in her heart, a small seed of hope in the fertile ground of her longing to belong. Father Luis returned to the room with Dr. Ana, who brought good news about Mercedes's discharge. "You can leave on Monday," she confirmed, reviewing the latest rehabilitation report. "But you'll need to come back 3 times a week for physical therapy and no excessive exertion for at least another month." "Where will she live?" Carmen asked, always practical. "We can't go back to the apartment we were in before. Alberto knows that address." Dr. Ana exchanged a look with Father Luis before responding. "Actually, we have a proposal for that. The hospital manages some transitional housing for recovering patients. Small, furnished apartments in a building with 24-hour security. You could stay there for 3 months while you find a permanent place." The solution seemed perfect, but Carmen, accustomed to looking for the hidden catch in every offer, to distrusting what seemed too good to be true, couldn't help but ask, "And the twins, could they live there too?" The silence that followed her question was answer enough. Dr. Ana was the first to break it. "The apartments are very small, really designed for one person in recovery, and since Mercedes will still need help with certain daily tasks." "What the doctor is trying to say," Father Luis interjected, "is that the twins would stay temporarily at Casa San Jose until Mercedes is fully recovered and finds a suitable home for everyone." Carmen felt her newborn hope waver. Another separation, another wait. More time in the limbo between being a family and only dreaming of it. "But you could stay with Mercedes in the transitional apartment," Dr. Ana added quickly, sensing her dismay. "You could help with her recovery, and both of you could visit the twins daily. It would be a temporary situation, a step toward full reunification." The proposal made sense from a practical perspective, but for Carmen, it meant a difficult choice. Stay with Mercedes, supporting her recovery, or remain at Casa San Jose with the twins, ensuring they received the specific care they were accustomed to. "I need to think about it," she said finally, her voice small but firm. Mercedes took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to decide right now, sweetheart. We have a few days to consider all the options, to find the best solution for everyone." The rest of the visit passed with lighter conversations, focused on the twins' progress, anecdotes from Casa San Jose, and tentative plans for a future everyone wanted to believe was possible. But in Carmen's mind, the pending decision occupied a central space, impossible to ignore. When it came time to say goodbye, Carmen hugged Mercedes with an intensity that surprised them both. "Everything's going to be okay," she whispered, repeating the words she had so often heard from adults trying to comfort her, but had rarely believed. This time, however, she infused them with all the conviction she could muster, as if saying them with enough faith could make them true. On the ride back to Casa San Jose, Carmen remained unusually quiet, her gaze lost in the urban landscape. Passing by the car window, the twins slept peacefully in their special seats, unaware of the complicated decisions and emotions the adults and near-adults around them were experiencing. Father Luis respected her silence for much of the ride. Until, stopped at a traffic light, he ventured to share a thought. "You know, Carmen, sometimes life presents us with situations where all the options seem imperfect, where no path feels entirely right or entirely wrong." Carmen looked at him, intrigued by this observation that seemed to read her thoughts directly. "In those moments," the priest continued, "all we can do is listen to our heart, trust our instincts, and remember that even the toughest decisions aren't final. There's always a chance to adjust the course, to find new solutions to the problems that arise." The simple but profound wisdom of these words resonated with Carmen. Perhaps there was no perfect decision. Perhaps any path she chose would come with its own challenges and complications. The important thing, as it had always been in her young but intense life, was to keep moving forward, adapting, surviving. Upon arriving at Casa San Jose, Sister Teresa greeted them with news that Sofia Martinez, the social worker, had stopped by and wanted to meet with them the next day to discuss the next steps in the case. "She said she has some important updates to share," Teresa added, helping Carmen unload the twins from the car. Night fell over the city, bringing a gentle rain that pattered against the windows of the shared room. Carmen, after putting the twins to bed, sat by the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass, forming unpredictable patterns that reminded her of the unexpected twists in her own life. She thought of her mother, how she would have advised her to face this situation, and recalled her words, repeated so often during tough times. "When you don't know what to do, daughter, do what your heart tells you." The heart rarely goes wrong about what truly matters. What did her heart tell her now? To stay with the twins, those little beings who had awakened such a powerful protective instinct in her, or to go with Mercedes, the woman who had offered her not only shelter when she needed it most, but also the promise of a family, a place to belong? Before sleeping, in the dim light of the room illuminated only by the small bedside lamp, Carmen made a decision. Tomorrow, when they met with Sofia Martinez, she would present her own proposal. They would find a way to stay together, all of them, with no more separations, no more waiting. She didn't know exactly how to achieve it, but she was determined to try. With that resolution, she fell asleep, lulled by the sound of the rain and the steady breathing of the twins, dreaming of a future where the storms would be behind them and where she would finally find a true home. Francisco Martinez didn't visit the San Francisco church by chance that Sunday morning. After 15 years dedicating his life exclusively to building his real estate empire, the sudden death of his best friend, Elena, in a tragic car accident 4 years earlier, had triggered a profound existential crisis in him. Elena wasn't a blood relative, but had been his closest friend since childhood in the orphanage, the only person who truly knew him beyond the facade of a successful businessman. The social worker had died trying to save a child during a flood in the marginal neighborhood where she worked, a fitting end that perfectly reflected how she had lived. "I'm 50 years old, Father. I've built buildings that will stand for generations, but who will remember me? What difference have I really made?" This question tormented him weekly in his conversations with Father Luis, who patiently guided him through a process of spiritual rediscovery. That specific morning, he had arrived earlier than usual. His insomnia, a companion for years, had worsened in recent weeks. Father Luis hadn't yet arrived for the first Mass, which was unusual, as the priest was known for his punctuality. The dawn light began to filter through the stained glass windows when Francisco noticed the side door ajar. His first thought was practical. Check if there had been a robbery. The neighborhood, once peaceful, had faced a wave of crime in recent months. "Don Antonio, Father Luis," he called, entering cautiously, referring to the elderly sacristan who had cared for the church for decades. The silence was broken by a muffled infant's cry coming from behind the altar. The scene his eyes captured would change his life forever. A thin girl with deep dark circles and clothes still damp from the previous night's rain was trying to soothe two visibly dehydrated babies. "Sir, they are my little brothers," she exclaimed upon seeing him, her posture immediately defensive. "Please don't separate us." She promised Aunt Mercedes she'd take care of them. Francisco observed the girl's small, trembling hands, but her gaze, a deep green like polished jade, conveyed an unshakable determination that left him momentarily speechless. "I'm not going to separate you," he said finally, kneeling to her. "Level. The babies look like they need urgent medical attention. I can help." Carmen hesitated, years of distrust toward adults making her instinctively step back. "How do I know you won't call social services? They'll separate us." Francisco understood he needed to earn the girl's trust first. "I won't do anything without your consent," he promised, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm a friend of Father Luis, who should arrive any moment. We can wait for him if you prefer." The morning light streamed through the colored stained glass, bathing the girl's face in a mosaic of hues that revealed to Francisco something that made his heart skip a beat. It wasn't a direct physical resemblance, but there was in the girl's countenance that same mix of vulnerability and strength that had always characterized Elena, a gentle but unbreakable determination in the face of adversity. At that moment, Father Luis rushed into the church, delayed by a community emergency. Upon witnessing the scene, he quickly joined them, bringing a sense of familiarity and security that allowed Carmen to lower her guard slightly. "Father Luis," she said with evident relief, "they need milk and clean water." The mutual recognition between Carmen and the priest didn't go unnoticed by Francisco. The girl clearly trusted the cleric. "Francisco is my friend of many years," Father Luis assured, placing a hand on the businessman's shoulder. "He can help us care for these little ones without involving the authorities for now." With this mediation, Carmen finally agreed to let Francisco fetch water to prepare the baby's milk, while the priest reassured her about the next steps, establishing the initial bridge of trust that would make everything that followed possible. 6 months had passed since that providential encounter in the church. Carmen, seated by the large window of the apartment she now shared with Mercedes and the twins, watched the city awaken under the first light of dawn. Miguel and Gabriel, now over a year old, slept peacefully in the next room, unaware of the daily miracles that had transformed their lives. The path had been anything but easy. After that first meeting, Francisco Martinez had discreetly mobilized his considerable resources to help them. He first arranged for Dr. Ana Vega, a personal friend as well as a doctor, to treat the twins without official records that could alert Alberto. Then he made available one of his vacant apartments, a modest but comfortable and secure place for Mercedes to complete her recovery with the children. Most surprising, however, was how the businessman personally involved himself in the case. He didn't limit himself to providing financial aid from a distance, as Carmen initially expected. Instead, he regularly visited the apartment, bringing not only material provisions but also his time and attention. He played with the twins, showing a patience that contradicted his image as a ruthless businessman, and spent long hours talking with Carmen, showing genuine interest in her opinions and ideas. "Good morning, early bird," Mercedes greeted, entering the living room with a steaming cup of coffee in hand. In recent months, she had recovered not only her physical health, but also her spirit. The constant fear that had shadowed her gaze for so long had been replaced by a quiet determination. "Nervous for the big day?" Carmen smiled, momentarily turning her gaze from the window. "A little," she admitted. "What if they don't like me? What if they ask questions I don't know how to answer?" Today was her first day at Santa Maria School, an educational institution that, thanks to Francisco's intervention, had agreed to enroll her mid-term. After months of intensive tutoring with a private teacher, Carmen had reached the academic level corresponding to her age in nearly all subjects, surprising everyone with her ability to absorb knowledge. "They'll love you," Mercedes assured, sitting beside her and putting an arm around her shoulders. "You're smart, kind, and hard-working. That's all that matters." The doorbell interrupted their conversation. Francisco, punctual as always, had arrived to take Carmen to her first day of school. Since he had taken on an increasingly significant role in their lives, the businessman insisted on being involved in every meaningful moment, as if trying to make up for all those he had missed during his years of exclusive obsession with business. "Ready to conquer the academic world?" he exclaimed upon seeing Carmen, trying to lighten the evident tension on the girl's face. He brought with him a new green backpack that perfectly matched Carmen's eyes. "A little gift for the occasion," he explained, handing it to her. Carmen took the backpack with reverence, running her fingers over the soft, sturdy fabric. It was the first she'd ever had that wasn't second-hand, the first without signs of prior use or makeshift repairs. "Thank you, Don Francisco," she said softly, using the respectful form she always used despite his repeated invitations to call him simply by his name. The drive to the school was quiet. Carmen looked out the window of the luxurious car, observing the neighborhoods they left behind, from the humble areas where she had spent much of her life to the residential district where her new school was located. It was a physical journey that perfectly symbolized the emotional and social journey she had undertaken in recent months. "You know," Francisco commented, breaking the silence as they neared their destination. "I was nervous on my first day of school, too. I was 8 years old. I'd spent my whole life in an orphanage. And suddenly, I found myself in a classroom with 20 kids who seemed to know exactly what to do and how to behave." Carmen looked at him, surprised. Though the businessman had occasionally mentioned his orphanage past, he had never shared personal details about his childhood before. "What did you do?" she asked, genuinely interested. "I sat in the back row and tried to be invisible," Francisco confessed with a nostalgic smile. "But there was a girl, Elena, who noticed how lost I was. She sat next to me and shared her colored pencils with me. 'You don't have to be alone if you don't want to,' she told me. It was the start of a friendship that lasted a lifetime." The story touched something deep in Carmen. She, too, had known loneliness, the feeling of being out of place, of not belonging. "Do you think I'll find my own Elena?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Francisco glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. "I'm sure of it. You're special, Carmen. The people who matter will recognize that." Upon arriving at the school, an imposing stone structure with expansive gardens, Carmen felt her courage waver. Groups of children in impeccable uniforms entered through the main doors, chatting animatedly among themselves. How would she fit in, with her story so different, her experiences so far removed from the privileged lives she imagined her classmates led? "Remember," Francisco said, as if reading her thoughts, "what makes you different is exactly what makes you valuable. You've lived more, learned more about real life than many of these kids. That's not a disadvantage. It's a strength." The principal, a middle-aged woman with a kind but firm expression, received them in her office. While she and Francisco discussed final administrative details, Carmen mentally reviewed all the instructions Mercedes had given her. Be respectful to teachers. Don't speak unless asked directly. Maintain composure no matter how the other children treated her. "Carmen will be in Miss Olivia's class," the principal explained, addressing both of them. "She's our best fifth-grade teacher, especially skilled at integrating new students. Would you like to meet her now before classes start?" Carmen nodded, inwardly grateful for this small act of consideration. The idea of walking straight into a classroom full of strangers was terrifying. Miss Olivia turned out to be a young woman, perhaps in her 30s, with her hair in a simple braid and red-framed glasses that gave her an approachable, modern air. Her smile upon seeing Carmen was genuine and warm. "I've heard a lot about you," she said, shaking her hand as if she were an adult, a gesture that immediately won points with Carmen. "The principal told me you're exceptionally good at math. We're just starting a unit on fractions that I think you'll find interesting." The comment, so specific and focused on her academic abilities, rather than her personal situation, was exactly what Carmen needed to feel valued for her merits, not pitied for her circumstances. When it came time to say goodbye, Carmen felt a lump in her throat. For months, Francisco had been a constant presence, an anchor in the sea of uncertainties that was her life. Leaving him now, even for just a few hours, awakened old fears of abandonment. "I'll be right here at pickup," he promised, reading her expression again with that intuition he seemed to have developed specifically for her. "And I want to hear all about your day, every detail." With that promise echoing in her mind, Carmen followed Miss Olivia toward her new school life, the green backpack firmly clutched to her chest like a shield. The first hours were a whirlwind of new experiences. The introduction to her classmates, curious glances, polite but probing questions about where she came from and why she was joining midterm. Carmen responded with the rehearsed answers she had practiced with Mercedes. Her family had recently moved to the city, she had been homeschooled due to health issues, and now she could finally attend a regular school. To her surprise, the children seemed to accept these explanations without much questioning. A girl named Laura, with bright dark eyes and a contagious smile, even offered to share her textbook when she noticed Carmen didn't yet have all her materials. "Can you sit with me until yours arrive?" she offered naturally. During recess, Carmen sat on a bench under a large tree, observing the social dynamics of the playground, so different from those she knew in her neighborhood. Here, there were no children fighting over scarce resources or forming alliances for mutual protection. Instead, she saw groups playing organized games, sharing plentiful snacks, discussing TV shows and video games she barely knew. "Do you like to read?" The question came from a thin boy with glasses who had sat at the other end of the bench without her noticing. He held a thick book she vaguely recognized as part of a popular fantasy series. "Yes," she answered honestly. Reading had been one of her great discoveries in recent months. Francisco had filled the apartment with books of all genres, and Carmen had devoured everything from children's classics to encyclopedias, fascinated by the worlds that opened through printed words. "I'm Javier," the boy introduced himself, extending a hand formally. "The unofficial class librarian. If you want recommendations, just ask." This simple exchange set the tone for the day. Carmen didn't instantly become the most popular girl, or find a group of inseparable friends like in the movies, but she discovered small moments of connection. Laura sharing her book, Javier offering literary recommendations, Miss Olivia smiling approvingly when she correctly solved a fractions problem on the board. By the time the dismissal bell rang, Carmen felt a mix of exhaustion and stimulation. So many new impressions, so much information to process, so many names and faces to remember. But also, for the first time in a long time, a sense of possibility, of horizons expanding rather than narrowing. Francisco was waiting exactly where he had promised, leaning against his car with an expectant expression. His face lit up when he saw her walking toward him, not dragging her feet as he had feared, but with firm steps and a faint smile. "Well?" he asked when Carmen reached him. "How was the big day?" Carmen considered the question for a moment, searching for the right words to describe the complex mix of emotions she had experienced. "Different," she said finally. "Very different from everything I knew. But I think I could get used to it." Francisco smiled, a gesture that completely transformed his usually serious face, making him look years younger. "That's a start," he said, opening the car door for her. "And beginnings are always the hardest." During the ride back to the apartment, Carmen shared more details. Miss Olivia's kindness, Laura's generosity, the conversation with Javier about books. She also mentioned the awkward moments, like when she didn't know how to respond about the latest episode of a popular series, or when she froze during the initial introduction. "The important thing," Francisco said as they stopped at a traffic light, "is that you gave yourself the chance to experience something new, something that seemed scary. That takes a special kind of courage." Upon arriving at the apartment, Mercedes and the twins were waiting with a small celebration. There was a handmade banner that read, "Congratulations, Carmen," balloons in the corners of the living room, and a homemade cake on the table. "All this for my first day of school?" Carmen asked, genuinely surprised by the display. "Not just for that," Mercedes replied, exchanging a meaningful look with Francisco. "We have important news to share with you." Carmen felt a shiver of apprehension. In her experience, important news was rarely positive. Would Alberto have reappeared? Would they have to move again? Was Francisco withdrawing his support? "Sit down, sweetheart," Mercedes said, guiding her to the couch. The twins, now much more active and vocal, crawled over as if sensing the moment's importance. "Francisco and I have been working on something for the past few months. Something we wanted to tell you when it was more concrete." Francisco sat across from her, his expression serious but with a glint in his eyes that Carmen couldn't quite interpret. From his briefcase, he pulled out a folder with official documents. "Remember when you promised to try to get your legal guardianship?" Mercedes asked, taking her hand. "Well, it's been a complicated process with lots of evaluations and paperwork, but the judge signed the resolution this morning," Francisco completed. "Mercedes is officially your legal guardian. You no longer have to worry about social services or possible separations." The news hit Carmen like a wave, leaving her momentarily speechless. For so long, she had lived with uncertainty, with the constant fear of being separated from those she loved, that the idea of legal stability seemed almost incomprehensible. "That means I can stay forever?" she asked finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Forever," Mercedes confirmed, her eyes shining with emotion. "You're part of this family, Carmen. Legally now, but in our hearts for a long time." Francisco cleared, his throat softly, visibly moved. "There's more," he said, pulling another document from the folder. As part of the process, we investigated Alberto's situation. With the evidence of his assaults and his prior record, the judge has revoked all his parental rights over Miguel and Gabriel. He can't claim them or approach them ever again. This second piece of news was like lifting an invisible weight Carmen had been carrying without fully realizing it. The threat of Alberto, the possibility that he might one day show up to take the twins, had been a constant shadow over her newfound happiness. And there's one last thing, Francisco added, his voice shifting slightly, becoming more personal. I've been thinking a lot these past months about the future, about what really matters in life, and I've made an important decision. Carmen and Mercedes looked at him, intrigued by this new revelation. I've decided to create a foundation, he announced. The Elena Foundation, in honor of my friend. Its mission will be to help children in vulnerable situations, providing them with education, safe housing, and legal support for cases like yours. The idea, so aligned with the spirit of the woman who had meant so much to Francisco and now indirectly to them, seemed to light up the room with new hope. And I'd like, he continued, addressing Carmen specifically, for you, someday, when you're ready, to consider getting involved in the project. I think your experience, your unique perspective, would be invaluable in helping other children going through what you've been through. The proposal, which acknowledged not only her painful past, but also the strength and wisdom she had gained through it, touched Carmen deeply. It wasn't just an offer of redemption for her past suffering, but a recognition of her intrinsic value, her ability to transform her own pain into help for others. I'd like that, she replied simply, but with a conviction that went beyond her years. As they shared the celebration cake, with the twins clapping and laughing from their high chairs, Carmen looked around at this makeshift family that fate had brought together. Mercedes with her unconditional love and quiet strength, Francisco with his generosity and search for meaning, Miguel and Gabriel with their innocence and contagious joy. It wasn't the family she had imagined having, nor the path she had expected to travel. But in that moment, surrounded by love and possibilities, Carmen felt she had finally found her place in the world. And with that certainty came a peace she had never known before. The peace of knowing that, whatever happened, she was no longer alone. The midday sun bathed the small backyard in golden light where Carmen, now 12 years old, helped the twins, Miguel and Gabriel, plant sunflower seeds in colorful pots. 2 years had passed since that providential encounter at the San Francisco church. 2 years of profound changes and gradual healing for all of them. Not so deep, Miguel, Carmen instructed patiently, guiding the small hand of the boy who was trying to bury the seed too far. It needs to feel the sun to grow. Gabriel, always observant, watched carefully before perfectly mimicking his brother's and Carmen's movements, whom he adored with unwavering devotion. The twins, now 3 years old, had developed clearly distinct personalities. Miguel was impulsive and energetic, while Gabriel was thoughtful and methodical, as if they balanced each other's differences. From the kitchen window, Mercedes watched the scene with a serene smile. Her life had turned completely around since those dark days of violence and fear. She now worked as an administrative assistant at the newly created Elena Foundation, a job that allowed her flexible hours to care for her family while feeling part of something meaningful. They're a marvel, aren't they? Francisco's voice behind her startled her slightly. The businessman had taken to visiting them several times a week, becoming a constant, comforting presence in their lives. Mercedes nodded, not taking her eyes off the garden, where Carmen was now explaining something about the plant life cycle, gesturing animatedly while the twins listened with rapt attention. Sometimes I wonder who's teaching whom more, she commented. Carmen teaches them about plants and numbers, but they're teaching her to enjoy her childhood, something she never really had. Francisco joined her at the window, watching the scene pensively. Some children are born adults, he said after a moment. I was like that too. Always too serious, too responsible. Elena was the one who reminded me we were still kids, who made me play and laugh. The mention of Elena, as always, brought a special glint to his eyes. In the past 2 years, the Elena Foundation had grown from an abstract idea into a tangible reality. Starting with a small community center in Cerro de la Fe, it had gradually expanded to offer legal aid, basic medical care, and complementary educational programs. The money Francisco had amassed over years chasing an empty success now found a purpose that filled the void in his soul. Have you seen Carmen's grades this term? Mercedes asked, changing the subject. Her teacher says she could skip a grade next year. She's progressing so fast. The pride in her voice was evident, like any mother speaking of her child's achievements, because that's what Carmen had become to her, a daughter in all but name. The adoption papers were in process, one more step in the legal consolidation of what their hearts already knew. I'm not surprised, Francisco replied. She has an extraordinary mind. The other day, she was reviewing the blueprints for the foundation's new center and caught a calculation error even the architect missed. Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Mercedes went to answer it, finding Sofia Martinez, the social worker who had followed their case and, over time, had become a friend and invaluable ally. I bring good news, Sofia announced without preamble, her smile revealing it was indeed something significant. The judge has signed the adoption papers. Mercedes brought her hands to her mouth, stifling a cry of joy. They had waited for this moment for months, navigating the complex legal system with the help of lawyers provided by Francisco. Does Carmen know? Sofia asked, looking toward the garden where the girl was still absorbed in her task with the twins. Not yet, Mercedes replied. We wanted to be sure before telling her. She's been through so many disappointments in her life. Francisco nodded understandingly. We should tell her tonight during dinner. We can celebrate together. The evening was special, with the table set with care and everyone's favorite dishes. The twins, sensing the festive atmosphere, were particularly animated, sharing choppy stories about their adventures at the preschool they now attended. It was after dessert when Mercedes finally shared the news. Carmen, she began, her voice slightly trembling with emotion. There's something important we want to tell you. The girl looked at them with attention, her expression subtly shifting, from curiosity to nervousness. Despite the progress and stability of the past 2 years, a part of her still expected happiness to be temporary, that at any moment, everything could crumble again. The adoption papers have been approved, Mercedes continued, taking her hand across the table. Soon, you'll officially be my daughter before the law and everyone. Carmen remained still for a moment, processing the information. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone, she stood from her chair and walked around the table to hug Mercedes with a moving intensity. I was already your daughter, she whispered against her shoulder. For a long time. Francisco watched the scene with moist eyes, remembering another girl decades ago who had desperately longed for a home and family. Elena would have loved this, he thought. She would have seen in Carmen the same indomitable spirit he saw, the same determination to turn pain into strength. The twins, not fully grasping the moment's significance but caught up in the emotion, joined the hug, creating a knot of arms, laughter, and a few tears. Later that night, when the children were asleep and Mercedes had retired, Francisco and Carmen shared a quiet moment on the apartment's small balcony. The city stretched out. Before them, a sea of twinkling lights under a starry sky. You know, Francisco said after a comfortable silence, when I found you that morning in the church, I thought I was helping you and the twins. But now I realize it was you who saved me. Carmen looked at him, intrigued by this confession. How could I save you? You had everything, money, companies, power. Francisco smiled with melancholy. I had things, Carmen, objects, properties. But my life was empty. I'd forgotten what really matters. He extended his hand toward the sky, pointing at the stars. My friend Elena used to say we're here to be lights for each other, that our purpose is to illuminate others' paths when the darkness seems impenetrable. You were that light for me, with your courage, with your ability to love those children unconditionally, who weren't even your blood. Carmen absorbed these words, moved by the sincerity they conveyed. My mother talked about light too. She said after a moment. She told me that even on the darkest nights, there are always stars shining, even if we can't see them at first glance. They stayed there, gazing at the firmament, each lost in their own thoughts,